My clock says 5 o'clock Israel time, so I want to welcome those of you whose faces I can see and those who I can't see. If anyone who is invisible, my usual plea, if anyone who is invisible feels like revealing herself, that would make it even nicer. I have to say that my main feeling at the moment is joy to see you. There's no question about that. I've been having a hard time, I will confess, just wondering how I was going to do this year. How am I going to find words for a situation that should meet in any way the reality of a situation in real life from which I am physically suffering, and I'm sure many of you are as well. Lack of sleep, lack of clarity, lack of, a deep traumatic impact. There is an expression that the rabbis use, which actually has its source in the story of Noach. Before I go any further, I want to dedicate the shir. I'm very bad about this, but with a whole heart, I want to dedicate this shir in the name of Joe Rich, Iluid Nishmata, of his mother, Ellen Rich, Et Kalea Bat Shraga Shachna. So that's the dedication. And now I come back to me and you. The feeling is that there have been, the situation that we're in now here in Israel is a situation that defies words. There are many images, there are many thoughts, there are many physical feelings, but words are few to describe anything but the sheer facts of the situation. And here I am trying to find words now to do something very different. We're learning Torah. Let's say that's a different thing from reality. Torah is still different, right? It's still an area in which you can talk. Divrei Torah. One of these Divrei Torah, one of these Torah expressions that has its origin with Noach. It's a radical one. It says something like this: Charav alav olamo. His world was destroyed for him. There was a personal churban. Right? It was a personal sense of churban, which in the case of Noach is all too literal, of course. That's exactly what happened, that the world was literally destroyed and he is the only survivor. And so he has to bear that experience alone with his family and so forth. So that what you have is Noach in a literal way, it becomes a very powerful image in my mind for the aloneness of every person whose world has been destroyed. Then there is something that happens when you meet other people who feel the same thing. And then there's a certain possibility of affinity. But nevertheless, there is something profoundly personal about it. And here now we're moving from the world of literal reality to one of story reality, words in a book, Divrei Torah. And Divrei Torah are other. They are not the same as reality. So that what I'm afraid of is that I will give a shir that will be all very fine in itself, but will not manage to touch in any meaningful way the reality from which I'm speaking, in which case I will not feel so good. I want in some way, but I can't will this, I want in some way to meet the reality that's in all our minds, that we are all in some way quivering from. What does the psalmist say in Psalm 77? He describes the impossibility of finding words. Nif'amti velo adaber. Nif'amti. Very powerful image. Nif'amti is I am clanging like a bell. Ha'amon. Right? That's a poetic translation, meaning I'm confused, I am baffled, I'm disoriented, I can't speak. I can't find words. It's the word that's used to describe Paro's reaction to his dreams. to his ominous dreams. But it has that sense of an inner jolting. The bell is clanging from side to side and you don't quite know where to put yourself. It's a very physical reaction. And I want to move now into our material because we're here for Torah. And I'm hoping, as I say, that there will be moments when something will light up in the reality situation in a way that's at all helpful for any of us. And so I want to approach this with the difficulty of knowing how to think, which is a difficulty. It's not just how to speak, but how to think about something. How do we actually think about this? In the Torah and in the Midrash particularly, God doesn't know what to think. It's a very dramatic thing to say. But we have it on the pasuk here. Do you have your source sheets, by the way? Yes. This is not on the source sheet, but you can find it in your Chumash. Perek Vav pasuk Gimel 6:3. But we hear about some of the evils of that generation, and then Vayomer Hashem, and then God said, Lo yadon ruchi ba'adam le'olam. I am not going to go on forever tossing and turning, ladun. Rashi translates it, yitraem, yitraem, to be troubled, to toss around, not knowing what to think of the human being. My spirit is troubled and ambivalent and restless. This can't go on forever. I don't know whether to create them or whether to destroy them, whether to keep them alive or whether to destroy them. That situation can't go on forever. There has to be a decision at some point. So rather ominously, we're told that God himself doesn't know what to think in certain situations. How do you look at a situation in a world that you did create in spite of all the odds? So I'm starting now. I seem to have landed myself up and starting with God. God plays an extraordinary role in the story of the flood. I don't think there's a parallel story anywhere in Tanakh where we are in some sense let into the intimacies of God's feelings, his indecision, extremely human, extremely anthropomorphic descriptions of God, as he himself is standing on the brink before the Mabul, and he doesn't know what to do. And then what happens, if you look at the passage right at the end of last week's Parsha, which leads into the flood, that's chapter 6, verse 8. Two verses further on. Vayar Hashem, and God saw then that great was the evil of the human being on the earth. Rabba ra'at ha'adam al ba'aretz, on the earth. V'chol yetzer machshavot libo rak ra kol hayom. And all the thoughts of his heart are just evil, pure evil, all day long. Now that sounds pretty unequivocal. What God sees now, his vision of the human world, doesn't sound as if he's hesitating anymore. He's already come to a decision. And it's a decision that has to do with a totality of vision. He looks at this world and he thinks, absolutely not, impossible. Kol hayom, kol machshavot libo, total. Vayinachem Hashem ki asa et ha'adam ba'aretz, and God changed his mind. He regretted having created the human being on the earth. Again, the repetition of that, as if man's involvement, the human being's involvement with the earth, is part of the situation. And God was saddened to his heart. And God, Rashi translates, Nitabel al ovdan ma'aseh yadav. You can see it in number 1 on your source page. If you look at your sources now, on the word vayit atsev, it's in number 1 and it's in Daled, 1D. Vayit'atzev el libo, nit'abel al ovdan ma'aseh yadav. He was mourning for the loss of the work of his hands. And then there is another proof text given of the same idea, that atzuv is not just to be sad. Vayit atzev, especially when it's reflexive, is somehow much more encompassing than just a kind of mood of sadness. It has to do with a kind of radical mourning, despair for something you have created. For what you invested in this vision, which now disappoints so badly. Like, let's say, a writer or a painter who, at a certain point in the enterprise, looks at his painting and he just shakes his head and his heart sinks and he thinks, nothing to do with this. There is no possibility of repair here. And he screws it up and, he takes the paper and just throws it in the wastebasket. It sounds like that, particularly in view of Rashi's consistent translation of the word itzavon throughout the story of the creation. That is, not exactly the story of the creation, the story of the punishment for the sin of Adam and Chava. Have a quick look at 1A, B, and C before we get to God's frustration and mourning. And you see how in each case, itzavon means having created something, and then suffering some kind of deep disillusionment about what you have created, losing a vision. For instance, when God says to the woman, to Chava, I will greatly increase your itzavon in giving birth. The answer, the translation of that Rashi offers is, it's not the pain of childbirth, it's not the discomfort of pregnancy. There are other expressions for those things. What particular experience of giving birth is the Torah addressing here, according to Rashi? Tsa'ar gidul banim. The frustration that is inherent in raising children. The moments of mourning where a vision is lost, where one brings up the child and one is disappointed. Such moments. Now, Chazal are very realistic, I don't know what the word is, about saying this, about the process of child rearing. Whenever I read it, I wince a little bit because I can't help still believing that there must be people who don't experience this at all. I'm sure there are people who don't experience this at all, who have pure joy in the raising of their children. At the same time, the world I live in gives many examples of, it's a fallen world, what can I tell you? Where there is that strange disappointment that has to do something that came out with something that came out of you, was filled with the hope of something you created, ma'aseh yadecha, the work of your hands, the contact of your hands with this page, this warm scribe, my hand. That's a line from Keats. It's a very, very wonderful line. He describes how this warm scribe, my living hand, when it's in the grave, that will be the test, when it's no longer warm and we're left just with the offspring, we're left just with the creation. Will that stand up to the test of time? Will it meet readers in the future, let's say? Will another hand want to get hold of them, of what I've written? Keats asks himself, and want to connect to my hand with his hand. Something that is a living reality of what hands do when they're doing their thing in the world. That is, that they're creating, and they're creating not only tools, it's not only an expression of power, but that the hand in some way reaches out to touch another hand. And that the hand is sensitive to the material that it's working with. The hand isn't just forming the material, but it is formed by the material. I want to stress that, rather difficult point right away. That God is sad, it says he's saddened to his heart. It's more than, well, I threw off something here, I threw off a world, and oh dear, I look at it from a distance and I don't like it. It's rather that his hand is disappointed. His hand-heart, the connection between the hand and his heart are affected by the excitement of creation, of what creation means, and then of mourning, of the loss of that. And so there's something very electric about the image, which Rashi focuses on here. In terms of childbearing, that's one place where you know it's Avon. And then in B and C, in B, it's in connection with the curse of the ground. Right? That the ground, when God curses the ground as part of his curse of Adam and Chava after the fall, when they're expelled from Gan Eden, he says to Adam, "Ve'achalta et esav hasadeh," and you will eat of the grass of the field. And that's supposed to be a curse. And Rashi asks, what's so terrible about eating of the grass of the field? Let's say parsley and thyme and all the vegetation of the field. You can prepare it so that it's fit for eating, and then it's a wonderful addition to the human diet. What is the curse in that? And he adds a kind of gratuitous twist to the story in order to get to his idea here of what it says in the Torah a little later, Arura ha'adama ba'avurcha bi'itzavon tochalena. The ground will be cursed for you. What does that mean? You will eat it in itzavon. And it's that nuance that Rashi wants to understand now in his way. And he says, what is itzavon? It's not when you just take the grass or the vegetation and you cook it up or you do something to prepare it for. It's when you planted vegetables. You planted other things, more ambitious things, and what came up is just weeds, thorns and thistles. It's that gap between desire and the fruit, what one gets back from the world. Almost a sense of a world that's contorted, that I can't handle at all. I can't meet it, and it doesn't meet me. I put good things into it, and it comes back to me with a kind of insult. It throws something back in my face. And that's how Adam will feel now. That's what it means to be cursed. That's what it means to suffer itzavon. It's a very hard word. And then the strange destiny of Noach fits into all this. Because when Noach is born, and a son is born to his father, then Rashi comments, a ben is born. What is a ben? A ben is, right, it's not here on your page, I don't think. A ben is someone from whom the world will be built up. Nivneh ha'olam, livnot. In other words, it's a kind of premonition of Noach's flood, and that Noach will be the source of the rebuilding in the end. And that on some level, there is a knowledge of this. Maybe his father doesn't consciously know this in any way, but there is some kind of sense around the birth of this child, a sense of salvation, of something, a moment of grace when this child is born. And then what we read is, Ze yinachamenu me ma'aseh yadenu me ma'asenu me yitzvon yadenu. This one will give us relief. Yinachamenu is how Rashi. It means this one will console us for the loss again, for the work of our hands. The loss. How does it go? This one will console us. Mima'asenu u'me'itzvon yadenu. This will give us relief from our hard work with our hands and from the frustration of the work of our hands, from the ground that God has cursed. That is a certain fate of being doomed to frustration in relation to the ground, of having a hard time producing what you want from the earth. Noach will be the savior in some sense for this. And Rashi goes as far as to play with the word Yenachamenu. This one will console us. And he says, he picks at it, and he says, but then he should have been called Menachem if it was a question of comfort. Why is he not called Menachem? He's called Noach because You should read it, Yaniach Mimenu. Yanachamenu becomes, he will give us relief, Noach, some kind of relaxation from the tensions of trying to get joy from the soil. And one of the very powerful midrashic glosses on this is strange comment about Noach, that he invented the plow, that his strange contribution to the creative work of the world was to invent a machine which would help human beings in their frustrating hard labor with the world. In that hard labor with the world, they have to do with your fingers up to that time. The only plows were the human hand. Somewhere there is that suggestion. You didn't have any mechanical extensions of the power of your hand. And something is being said here about Noach as the father of technology, as the father of ways to extend the power of the hand from the rather weak thing it was to start with, to something that can magnificently increase the power of the hand, to create all kinds of, let's say, to create, for instance, and I'm quoting from a book by Elaine Scarry, where she talks about the power of the work of the hand, power of tools. She talks about asbestos gloves, a baseball mitt, a pencil, a scythe. What do all these do? They make up for the vulnerability of the hand. Without the asbestos glove, I would burn my hand if I tried to hold on to something hot. Now I can hold heat onto something hot without paying any price for it. And that is something that human beings have developed with their hands. This is the power of the hand. Similarly, all the others, a pencil, a scythe, cutting power, a hearing aid, which became a telephone later. And then ultimately it became surgical innovations that helped the injured human hand to become workable again. That is, it benefits not just the world, but these things benefit the hand too. That is, that in a way, the creativity, the work of the hand creates the hand as well as creating things out there. That your hand, that the skeleton of your hand is either injured or helped, strengthened by the work you do. And it's strengthened in particular ways, so that in some way there is an organic conversation going on between the hand and the world. And that is the hope for the future. And Noach in some way comes to stand for that plow, which comes to deal with a human condition that has been doomed to some kind of inherent frustration since Gan Eden. Since the time of that original curse, there has been this inherent frustration in having children, in tilling the ground, and then ultimately in God's relation to the whole project. When God is now frustrated and says that basically there is no use anymore for the work of my hands, at that point, you go back to the text, you look at the end of Parshat Bereshit, and now we are well launched into our material. He was saddened to his heart. There was a painful relationship with his heart, his own heart, mind. It's been decided, Vayomer Hashem, and Hashem then said, I will wipe out the human being whom I have created from upon the face of the earth, from the human to the animal, to the crawling creatures, to the remes, and to the birds of the heaven. Ki nichamti ki asitim, because I have regretted, I have given up on the fact that I have created them. I am sorry. Somewhere I cancel out, and it's in the first person now. It's not that God regretted, but he says himself, I am now struggling with my heart. I'm taking the full impact of that part of myself that's called my heart. It's strangely anthropomorphic here, almost uncomfortable. God is now dealing with the conflict and saying there is no more conflict. And now nichamti, I now completely give up on the world. One strange thing about this is that the name of God, at the moment of determination to destroy, is Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, Hashem, and not Elohim. Normally we say Yud-Ke Vav-Ke is the name of God that refers to that dimension of God. Again, we're in this semi-Kabbalistic area, which is extremely anthropomorphic, almost disturbingly so, depending on your sensibility. You know, I find there to be actually something strangely invigorating about it, but it is disturbing as well. As if God is exactly like us, that God has somewhere there is a sense of a moment in which there's no more room for indecision. That God is undecided and undecided. How do you speak about God like that? But now suddenly he's totally decided. Why is the name for Midat HaRachamim, for God's aspect as mercy, used of him at this point? You would think when he comes to a decision for din, for final judgment, the other name would be used, the name for Midat HaDin. And instead, it's Vayomer Hashem. And conversely, right, this is one of the questions I want to try to get close to. At the end of the flood, right away at the end, if you want to look it up, it's chapter 8, verse 21. When God remembered Noach, and God began to send relief to the world. God began to withdraw the flood, to dry up the flood. And the God who remembers Noach is not the attribute of mercy, but the attribute of justice. Now, there's something so strange about this that Rashi has to comment on it. Yes, you can see it. Where can you see it? Yes, number 5. Vayiskor Elohim, and God remembered. So here Rashi is jumping to the later moment, the moment of mercy. Zeh Hashem Midat HaDin, who? That's the name of the attribute of justice, strict justice, anger, all the things that apparently God is now rolling back from. And what we see at this moment is the moment of overturning of the attribute of strict justice into the attribute of mercy. Now, it's a dynamic moment. It begins still in the world of flood, still in the world of shetef, of undiscriminating destruction. That's shetef, mabul, have that meaning. That doesn't distinguish between good and bad and innocent and corrupt. That particular horror that has to do with the flood, that's Midat HaDin, and suddenly at a certain moment, and God is named for the din still while it begins, the moment in which grace develops, in which God's loving side begins to evolve, is still named for where it begins. That is, there's an overturning, ne'epacha. There's an overturning of God's previous state. And God's decision to save the world at this moment is named for his starting point, not for where he ends up. In the same way, at the beginning of the flood, God is named for his state of mercy, and then that is overturned in some way. That is overturned and becomes the opposite, becomes Midat HaDin. So that we see God in some way, right, God's attributes, God's inner world, as capable of a kind of evolution, that it moves it rolls over, right, it turns over. There's a process that goes on here. This is a God who, go back now to number 3 on your, number 2 on your page. Here is a basic radical statement about God's sensibility, about what God was doing with himself from the beginning of time, before he created this world. Amar Rabbi Abahu, what was God doing before, originally? He was creating worlds and destroying them. Right, it's a kind of summary of God's activity before he settled on this world. This wasn't the first of God's world. He had tried many worlds before. He had tossed off many sketches before that. And he said about those other worlds, I don't like this. And he destroyed them. This one is not to my taste. I don't get hana'ah from it. This one doesn't meet me. I can't enjoy it. Again, that strangely personal aesthetic sense. Not I'm dooming them because they're immoral, or it's a sense of God as a full subjectivity. And God says, I don't like that, and destroys it, and don't like that, and destroys it. So God, it becomes a kind of serial, what can I say? I don't want to say the words, but there you have it. As if that's God's habit at the beginning. And then he sees this world, and he says, you know what? I like this one. And he keeps this one. And then there's still an indecision afterwards. Again, Rashi and the Midrash will come in, and they will say that there are, God can't quite make up his mind. He realizes that there's going to be sin, that why create someone who he's sure that in the end is going to sin, right? That's also right at the end of last week's Parsha in Rashi, on God's decision. Why did he create the world at all then? Rashi asks there. And then he talks about it, a dialogue in which a heretic asks Rabbi, sorry, can't quite remember the name at the moment, one of the rabbis, he asks him, doesn't your God know the future? When he makes something, he knows what's going to happen. He doesn't know what has yet come into being. So then why does the text say that God was disappointed? He was disillusioned, as if he had expected something different from what happened. Again, it's not omnipotent. It's not theologically correct to say this kind of thing of God. Well, who is your God that he's so very, very human? Rabbi, sorry, one moment, let me look him up. If anyone finds him before I do. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha then answers, Nolad lecha ben, have you ever had a child born to you? Right? Didn't you know when the child was born that he would die? You're bearing a child for loss, for anguish. Why did you rejoice when you had the child? What room is there for joy if you know the future? Right? And Rabbi Yeshua's answer is, at a time of mourning, there is mourning, and a time of joy is a time of joy, which one could have many thoughts about. Can you really separate the two so easily? Can you have joy even at a time of mourning? How valid is that joy? When I go in the street and I see everyone gray and bound up in themselves, and then I see this mother with this joyful look on her face, playing with her child, as if there is nothing else in the world. Now, this mother is not callous. She's in a certain world at that moment. She's in a world. And that world has a certain validity. There's no need to feel guilty, perhaps one could say. I know. What do I know? For moments of joy. Maybe that's something to do with the way the world is since the flood. Not at the time of the flood. God decided to destroy everything then. He gave up on the whole project. It wasn't anymore a question of, well, there's a good person who deserves to be saved, and then there's not a good person who deserves to die. It's not that kind of destruction anymore. It's a total, it's giving up on the concept. Giving up on God's concept of a world, of this world. There was a certain concept there. There was a vision of the world. And God says, no, it all has to go now. And then you have the strange last pasuk. It's so extraordinary. V'Noach matzah chen b'nei Hashem. And Noach found favor in the eyes of God. God has just said everything goes, right? And from man to animal to creepy crawly to bird, no exceptions. Because this is not a world, the world of destruction is not a world of exceptions. It's a world of totality, on the one hand. And on the other hand, suddenly there's this afterthought. God looks at Noah, Be'enei Hashem. God has a look at Noah and he says, yeah, he looked at the world and he decided to destroy it. Now he looks at Noah, he says, oh. And matzachen, that he likes Noah. Right? Really, when you say someone finds favor in your eyes, what it really means in plain English is you like them. You approve of them, you warm to them. And chen is grace. They have a beauty for you. And here you have God yielding to beauty with a strangely human flesh quality, the softness of flesh. That is, I'll take that out. I'm not so happy with that. But a certain kind of changeability, Noach matzachen. And notice how Noah's name becomes chen. Right? It's Noah's name inverted. That Noach became somehow a source of chen for God. That there is something in this world. Now, in that case, God is making an exception of Noach. And not only of Noach, but, and I think this is a very important point that I want to stress, that I think I got it from the Orach Chaim, who has very interesting and very difficult things to say about the God of mercy bringing destruction, and then regretting in some sense the totality of the destruction when he saves Noah. We see a certain process underway of total destruction in God's mind, and then a movement away from that with Noah into the world of exceptions. What does the world of exception mean? That when God says to Noah, Bo el hateva, come into the ark, make an ark, first of all, aseh lecha teva, make an ark. God is giving Noah a double message. Right? It's a double message. On the one hand, God is saying to Noah, there will be another such world of the same kind in the future because of you. What you have to put into your spaceship, into your box there, into your teva, is a sample of everything that will allow this world to continue after the destruction. So God hasn't, after all, given up on this world. I think that's what the Orach Chaim says, and it gave me a lot to think about. That one instinct of midat harachamim, perhaps, and here I could be completely wrong in my reading, I have to warn you, because I'm not sure, but I think that's what he's saying. If you want to find out for yourselves, if you can, is that it's part of God's rachamim to be totally disillusioned with the world to start with, because rachamim has about it a certain totality. It's a certain sense of all or nothing. It's a certain sense of either it's good or it's not good. I started looking at things with a broad vision and saying it's totally bad. So it's midat harachamim that's suffering here. It's midat harachamim that then decides to turn over into midat hadin in some way. I give up on the world. But then it's also midat harachamim that negates that. Right. It's denegation. There is a word for it, where you negate something and then you cancel out the negative. You cancel the negative, and that means that instead of creating, if God wanted another world, he could have created another world like all the worlds that he had created before, in theory. But God decides to roll back on din. Again, there's this. He rolls back on din and he says, no, not pure din, because I want this kind of world. Noah makes me think that this kind of world has some possibilities for it. And it's not that Noah is a perfect tzaddik, even though the Torah will describe him as a perfect tzaddik, tzaddik tamim, at the beginning of our parsha. It's one of the strangest things here. And in spite of the fact that the Torah accounts for Noah's exceptional salvation, that God did make an exception for Noah, and the Torah seems to be grounding that on the basis of how you make an exception to a rule. That is, he is a tzaddik after all. He's not a rasha, he's not wicked, so he deserves to survive. In spite of that very clear indication, what do Chazal come and say? That in many places, in different ways, even right there, he was a tzaddik tamim bedorotav, that famous Rashi. He was a perfectly righteous person in his generation. And this Rashi reads as a kind of qualifier on his perfect righteousness, taking him down a peg or two. Don't be too impressed with Noach, dear reader. Why do that to poor Noach? In his generation, he looked good. But in any other generation, he wouldn't have stood up to a measure of real din. It's only when God is feeling very kind that he would call him a tzaddik tamim. He wasn't a tzaddik tamim. And there are many such indications in Midrash, in Torah Sheba'al Peh, that Noach was Vayishaer, in the end, what is left of all human life. Vayishaer ach Noach. I can almost hear my father's voice, Zichrono Livracha, saying that with a certain smile. There was left only Noach and all who were with him in the ark. That was all that was left of that. And there is that sense of a remnant. What is left of the whole thing, this glorious world, which turned so bad? It's not a part of that world that's left. There is something, it's a splinter in a way. It's not a real part. It's something that's left over. It's a remnant. And it's in spite of everything it was left over. Has the feeling of, it's not a full-hearted salvation. It's something that we have Noach, and Noach has nothing to write home about, perhaps. And perhaps the fact that he's nothing to write home about has everything to do with what saves the world. That Noach is someone who learns how to pray to God in the only possible way to pray to God in this kind of situation. Now, what do I mean by that? What I want to say has to do yes, I think we can get closer to it if we look now at number 4. Number 4.
It's a great class with all our righteous din now. It's great. Thank you so much.
Please unmute. Please mute yourself. I didn't mention, by the way, that of course I will try to finish in time to open up to questions at the end, as we usually do. Number 4. The Gemara in Yevamot, some of you will be quite familiar with this because I like to quote it. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, why is prayer compared, the prayer of the righteous compared to a plow? Come back to the plow motif. What does a plow do? And Noach, in some small way, ach Noach, this little Noach who doesn't even get a proper 3-letter word, he's not even got 3 letters to his name. You know, he's a kind of he's a reduced Noach, ach Noach. He's a condensed Noach. Why is the prayer of the righteous compared to a plow? Or, as it's sometimes translated, a tar is translated a pitchfork, because a plow and a pitchfork have the same movement. What does the pitchfork do? It turns over, mehapech, that word we've seen already. It turns over the produce from one place to another. So the prayers of the righteous turn over God's character, God's sensibilities, God's midot, his ways of engaging with the world, from the way of anger to the way of compassion. And Chazal make the 2 terms rhyme, ragzanut and rachmanut, which gives you a feeling that, you know, I really could turn one over and make it into the other. One of these games, you know, if I'm playing with letters, you know, all I have to do is play a little bit with the letters, and it's really not very, all you do is turn it over. It's the opposite. But it's the opposite that's very close to itself. You can move from one to the other. You can move from ragzanut, from anger to compassion with strange ease, right? It just requires a little flip, some kind of a flip. People who are very angry sometimes experience this. They're not talked out of their anger slowly, but something suddenly happens to arouse a laugh or a sob or something, and immediately there's that overturning. That's what the prayers of the righteous achieve. What the plow does, that it turns over the midot of God, the ways of God in the world. Now, of course, we have to believe Chazal when they say this. We don't. How do we ever know this? When it comes to Noach, Noach in the Zohar is thoroughly blamed for not davening. That becomes one of the bases of accusation against Noach as being a very mediocre tzaddik. He was really a very disappointing. He was a tzaddik of this new disappointing world. If you had to have a tzaddik, he's a tzaddik that belongs in that world. What was wrong with him? It's a very paradoxical idea, which I'll just point at briefly. In the Zohar, well, here you have this theme, that when God said to Noach, I want you to build an ark and take your family and a specimen of everything that's alive, of every form of a future replica of this world into the ark. What Noach should have done should have been not just to obey God, but on the contrary, to argue with God in the form of prayer. He should have had a subjective reaction to God, a form of language. He should have had words to say to God. Right? That notion. Instead, what do we read? That Noach did exactly what God commanded him. We read it twice, which sounds like praise of Noach, because after all, isn't that what we're expected to do? Right? God wants there to be a specimen of a replica for the future. Good, that's good news. I'm going to be there. But Noach should have struggled with God's words. He should have maintained the attitude of tefillah in the face of God's indication that what God is saying. And the Zohar finds him he comes short. He falls short. Not only that, but he doesn't have anything to say to the people in his generation, even though he's given a year while the ark is being built, perhaps to have them, to encourage them to change their ways and to save themselves. In other words, he's a person who's in some way lacking in dialogue with others, in the capacity to talk to other people, the capacity to talk to God, and to change things, to affect the world in some way. So he gives up right away. And that is a severe problem. Compare him to Moshe Rabbeinu, for instance, when God, using very similar language as with the flood, it's the only similar situation where God says, that he has regretted, right? God regrets the whole story of the Exodus. There, Moshe doesn't just accept what God says. God says, "V'ata hanichali." Now just leave me alone for a while. Just lay off. Right? The word of Noach. Yeah, it's just let me be. You just let me be. Do what I say, and I will make you into the father of a future world. You personally will be, as it were, in your own personal box now, and let me just destroy. And there, of course, what we find in the Midrash is that what Moshe refuses to do is precisely that. And he begins to plead with God. He begins to argue with God. And part of his argument with God, according to the Zohar, it's really quite amazing, is if I do what you are officially telling me, consciously telling me, save yourself and let everyone else go, then I will be like Noach, who destroyed the whole world. How do Chazal, how do the Balei HaZohar bring in Noach here? From the play on the word Hanichali. God says, let me be, he's really saying ominously to Noach, to Moshe, if you want to act like Noach, you should just save yourself and let the whole world go. And Noach hears this with a certain ear and overturns the obvious meaning of God's words and transforms them into a prayer of rachamim. The obvious meaning of God's words is, that's it, there's nothing to do. Now, the issue is complicated, according to the Or HaChaim, made even harder by the fact that God really has decided finally and absolutely to destroy the world. And Noah's prayers might very well not have achieved anything. So how can he be blamed for not praying? Somewhere we are transferring the responsibility now onto Noah himself. We're saying there's something wrong with him, that he doesn't pray, in spite of the fact that Abraham prays for Sodom and Moshe prays for his people. What's wrong with him? And the Or HaChaim says, but what do you expect of poor Noah? God had made it amply clear that there's no point in prayer. That making an ark in itself means, if God, that was God's command, make an ark, that means both that you will be saved for the future and that there's no point in talking about this world, right? It's gone beyond any kind of discussion. That's what it means to make an ark. Use your hands to make an ark. That's now the only use of your hands that I want of you. So really what God is doing to Noah, and here the Or HaChaim uses this very strong expression, Hashem satam et tfilato. God blocked his prayer. Even if Noah had been wanting to pray, God blocks his prayer here by saying everything he says to him. And Kate's kol basar ba'lefanai, God says, the end of all flesh has now arisen in front of me. Meaning, in a sense, it's all been decided now. It has been decided. There is no longer any room for movement. And if God says that to Noach, how can he be blamed? Then there's a real sense that in a way, there is something about the state of the world and the state of God and the state of Noach that are mirroring each other. The world is now in a phase, like we say, the moon is in a phase. It's in a phase of total destruction. And the only rachamim that we can glimpse at this point is that there are survivors. That there is Noach, there's his immediate family. In other words, it's a survival of a concept of the world. That a certain way, but it's not the survival of any individuals, other than the exception. And there's that sense of the mode of the moment as being totally absolute. But what God wants, what God is looking for at the same time, always is the opposite. The possibility of an evolution, of a rolling over, of a turnover, which could come only through the prayer of the righteous. And Noach doesn't pray. At least that's what it looks like. Noach, he doesn't pray because he's blocked, you could say, by the state of things in the world. There are people who find it very hard to pray in our situation now, to find the words. And maybe there's something in himself also, that he is not a fully evolved human being. And therefore he is a kind of not brilliant survivor as a basis for a future world. Have a look now. Yes. On the question of God looking for the prayer of the righteous, regardless of the situation. What is the power of the prayer of the righteous? And I want to go back to the creation story. Creation story, Perek Bet, Pasuk He, a very strange moment in the process of creation. God has already declared, on the third day of creation, God has already declared Totsei haaretz deshe. Let the earth bring forth vegetation. And then we have read that the earth brought forth vegetation. Of course, at that creation stage, everything God says is immediately met by reality. Everything immediately happens. Vayomer vayehi. So, of course, what God said, let there be vegetation, then of course there is vegetation. And then there is something that stalls in the creation itself. And what stalls in Perek Bet Pasuk Hey, you can see there, at the beginning of the second chapter of creation, which retells the story in a slightly different way. V'chol siach hasadeh terem yeh ba'aretz. No vegetation in the field had yet appeared on the earth. And all the grass of the field had not yet sprouted. What do you mean? Rashi asks. Have a look at Rashi in number 6. Terem yeh ba'aretz. What does terem mean? It doesn't mean before it appeared. It means adayin lo, od lo. The vegetation had not yet appeared. And Rashi brings in these issues of, what do you mean by saying that? I thought we read before that God did say, bring forth vegetation, and it did happen. And so Rashi then offers this strange solution. I think something's gone wrong with the source. What he says is, maybe it's there in English better. Yes, it did not yet sprout. They didn't protrude, yes. What the Rashi's reading goes like this. That when God said, let it bring forth, it did bring forth, of course, but it got stalled at the surface of the earth. It didn't break through the surface of the earth. It remained under the surface, like an unshaved beard, it's waiting to go further, but it stopped right there. So it both did and didn't obey God's command. Formally, it did. God said, grow, it grew, but some instinct in it stopped there, which is God's will. Right? It's another aspect of that the earth should grow, but only so far. Why? So Rashi's answer is, reading from the text now, why did it not yet break through? Ki lo himtir Hashem Elokim ala aretz. God had not yet provided rain on the earth. So what's the point of having vegetation if you don't have rain to nurture it? And Adam ayin, and there was not yet any human being so early in creation, la'avodet ha'adama, to work the earth. So at that very early stage of the 6th day of creation, we are now in the 6th day of creation, before Shabbat, where up to this point, there wasn't a human being to till the earth, and there was no rain. So what would have been the point of the vegetation breaking through? It's waiting in the wings. The vegetation is waiting in the wings till there is a provision made for it to succeed in the world. And that will happen when there is a human being to till the soil and when there is rain. What Rashi makes of this, based on the Midrash, is quite extraordinary. What he says is there can't be vegetation until Adam ayin. Until there is a situation not of an Adam who is now absent. There is a non-Adam now. There's a minus Adam at the moment. But when Adam will appear, he will be capable of understanding the good of vegetation. He will look at the razored earth, at the unfruitful earth, and he will understand that the earth is ayin, that there is an ayin, there is a lack in the world. And if he understands the need for that vegetation and prays for that vegetation, if he uses his own initiative to fill in the blank, in other words, to fill in the absolute absence, it looks like, of any rachamim in the world, and to fill in with a strong sense of what is needed for the world, then the process continues and the vegetation breaks through. It's waiting in the wings for a human being to sing it into being, to dance it into being, to pray for it into being. It needs a human being who has a certain kind of creativity, certain measure of what I want to call creativity. And I want, from now on, I want to try to understand what is lacking in Noach and what does he, after all, provide in the end. A version of the necessary prayer that will allow the world to continue. Now, that necessary prayer in Rashi's version of the Midrash here, we read it as if the purpose of the whole withdrawal, the whole restraint on the grass, first of all, and then waiting till Adam comes and prays for it, and then there is the grass, and we've achieved our purpose. And the purpose is that the world is full of grass, that the world is full of vegetation, right? To complete creation. In Rashi's source, and I don't have any explanation for why Rashi seems to change. Rashi's source is in Gemara in Chulin 60a. The story is told slightly differently. It's told with an emphasis on the end point. What's the end point of the process? Not the growth of the vegetation, but God's desire for human prayer. This teaches you that God desires human prayer. That is, the whole story of the vegetation, and the vegetation grows in the Talmud there. This teaches you that what God really wants is tefillot hatzadikim, the prayer of the righteous. The prayer of the righteous, yes, it's an important qualification there. The prayer of the righteous. And the prayer of the righteous, who is righteous here? It doesn't sound as if Noach prays at all, as if he has anything to say. He seems to be totally silent there in the ark. And then there comes, and now have a look at number 7, which is really a radical midrash. There is a time for everything and a season for every object under the sun. Quoting from Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. There was a time for Noah to go into the ark. As it says, come you and your household into the ark. Come into the ark. And there was a time for him to leave the ark. As it says, Tzeh min hateva. There comes a moment where God says to Noah, leave the ark. What is this like? This is like an administrator who left his own place, the place that he was in charge of, and he settled someone else in his place there. In other words, he leaves his own realm and he appoints someone else to be in charge of his realm. When the administrator, right, the ruler, then comes back and says to his substitute, leave your place. What does it say? Mimkomcha. Leave this place that now feels as if it's your place, that this is where you belong. Now is the time to leave it. And then there's a slight twist in the text here. It's probably an error in the text. We have another analogy that's very similar, just changing the sofer here, parnas and sofer, but it comes to mean the same thing. Same imkomcha. What happened here? This is what happened to Noach. That Noach was told, "Tzeh min hateva," leave the ark, which is God's place, and Noach should not stay there. And God has given up the world, as it were, to Noach, this world to Noach. Noach now bears, right, the responsibility for taking care of the whole future world. That Noach, when God says to him, come into the ark, as I said before, I think I didn't finish the thought, he was saying to him both, there is no point in praying anymore, because all that will be left will be this ark. And at the same time, he's telling him that there will be a continuation of this world. That the seeds of this world will all be in the ark. So it's both bad and good news in one thing. But the time comes when God says to him, leave the ark, velo kibel alav latzet. and he didn't accept to leave. For some strange reason, he hangs back about in leaving. Why does he hang back? What does it mean to leave the ark? And here is, again, the unexpected creative turning over of the text that Chazal do. And they read beyond the obvious. And they say, it's not just literally leave the ark. When God says, come into the ark, it doesn't just mean walk onto the ark. There is a hidden meaning here. What is the hidden meaning? You have to have a different way of looking at the events that are described here. There's a certain kind of gaze at things, which is not just looking literally, concretely at the events as they're recorded in the Torah in their minimal reality. You have to think of larger things, the kind of wide focus look with which you look at, like an artist has two forms of attention, right? There are two forms of attention that one can have if you are an artist of one kind or another, and you want to create something in which you can both look at the details as you are painting. You both want to notice the details and take care that there should be room for all the details. And as you are working on the details, to have a sense of the whole painting. Right? An encompassing gaze. What do I want there to be around this detail? This detail is not really just a part of the whole. It has an organic connection with the wholeness of the whole. This detail has to be sufficiently aware of its role in the whole to lead to the whole, right? To be connected to the whole. To see both at the same time is very, very difficult. I have a classic conundrum of this kind. It's a way of, this is Anton Ehrensweig's book about the hidden order of art, and he's talking about this notion of two kinds of attention, right? You can have the two profiles facing each other. In order to see them both, you have to flip from one to the other. There is a flip there. One becomes the figure and the other becomes the ground. How does the artist manage to draw that? Is he concentrating on the figure? And how does he make the ground become the figure? It's not flipping. It's not, la foch is not flipping. I used the word before. The action of the plow. It's something more organic than that. That as you are painting that line, as you are drawing that line, you are not making a choice between the detail and the total. You are actually having both at the same time. You are capable of seeing both. And that's midat harachamim. That is, you are going to save this little man Noach, but that's not really the point. This man Noach now has to save the whole world. And he can't save it inertly, just by being alive. He has to save it by wanting the world to survive, by praying for it. And so Noach has to be painted in such a way, he has to be described in such a way, that we experience both his reluctance to be more than a detail, you know, and finishing the thought I had before, coming into the ark means basically, according to the sages, means basically you will have no relations with your wife while you're in the ark. No sexual relations. You are going to be in a box. You're going to be boxed up there, separate from your other. And you will be feeding the animals, right? In some important way, that will be your main role. And it's a role of chesed. It's a role of loving kindness in which Noach really knows exactly at what time every animal, right? There is a sense here that God will have a collaborator within the ark for the future of the world. That by the simple down-to-earth act of feeding the animals at the right time. But by the very same moment, he will be separated from his wife. There will be at a time of Churban, there cannot be sexual relations, joy, creativity of that kind. There can't be the production of children. It simply doesn't go together. So there's a sense now of kind of deprivation that Noach is faced with. But when it comes to leaving the ark and returning to the world of pru'aravu, of being fruitful and multiply, which is what God means when he says leave the ark, according to this secret language, which the Midrash hears in the text, right, that wide-ranging perception. According to that, he is now being restored to his wife. You came onto the ark, you and your children, your sons, and your wife and her daughter and her daughters, separate sexes. Now leave the ark, you and your wife. Notice if you look at it in the text. In other words, the text bears this out. There's a hint there that what God really means is get together with the world again. And the answer, the end of the Midrash suggests that Noach doesn't want to reconnect with that hazardous world of sexuality and of non-omnipotence, which is the real world outside. In the Teva, with all the deprivations, he has been playing a godlike role. How do we know? Because the Midrash has said here that God leaves his place, right, somewhere, the place of salvation. He gives it over to an undersecretary, someone to be in charge for the time being. Then God wants to put that undersecretary out into the world again, to go back to the other way of being, and to leave this world of God who doesn't sleep. Midrash says that Noah doesn't sleep, that all the time he's in the ark. He's looking after the world. Zan u'mefarnes. He's feeding the world like God. And he has no relationships, no sexual relation. Now, that sense of a world of deprivation, which is also a world of total control. And there's something about that sense of total control. If you're only focusing on the detail, like an anxious student, who can't free himself, an art student, who can't free himself sufficiently to think as he's painting the detail about the larger picture, about how this detail has to in some way give birth to the next detail and to allow himself not to know what the picture as a whole is going to look like, to live with that kind of limited knowledge. And Noach, in some way, reacts against this with a kind of rigidity. And how does he leave? He leaves with his sons and not with his wife in the text, until God assures him that there never again will be such a flood in the world. And in this Midrash, Noach's reluctance to leave the Teva is put in terms of, what's the point of my leaving and going back and having babies in the world, having children in a world like this? I no longer believe in that total concept, of the world. And God assures him, no, there is room for prayer. That is, there is room for that kind of life which you already know about in the ark. Even though you think you have been you are in charge of this world, and you don't want to go back into the dangerous world of interchanges and things going wrong and things being flooded out with the water that doesn't allow anything to remain solid and integral. Nevertheless, you have in a way already been praying. Have a look at number 8. Vayidaber Elokim el Noach lemor, and God spoke to Noach saying, "Say minateva, go out of the ark." Right? We've already said that. And then suddenly there's a quotation from Psalms. Hotzia mimasger nafshi. The psalmist cries out to God, "Please let me out of this prison. Let my soul, my whole being, release me from this prison." Masger, which actually is related to the word that is used in the text. Vayizgor Hashem ba'ado. That God locked him in there. That God put him in there, let him go in, and then he locked him in. And so here now, we have a prayer. And this prayer was prayed by King David, perhaps, yes, the psalmist. And it goes like this: Hotziami masker nafshi lehodot et shemcha. Release me from this closed place in order to give thanks to your name. then righteous people will crown you through me, will crown you, God, through me, because you will be good to me. You will have been good to me. Those are the words of the psalm. It's Psalm 142, verse 8. Now, that the Midrash brings that psalm now into the ark and into Noach. Right? That's what you do with Midrash. You hafochba v'afochba. It really belongs somewhere else in a different context. But Chazal choose to bring that moment in which someone cries to God, let me out of here. Let me out of here so that I'm capable of thanking you, so that I'm capable of some kind of gratitude to you. That is, that I'm capable of a certain relationship with you in which you did something for me. You let me out of here. That's I'm asking you, in a way, what I want to say then is that by formulating it in this way, this is what Midrash does. It leads us from the image of a prayerless, silent Noach, who with a large part of himself doesn't want to leave the ark, who feels much more comfortable within the detail, within that closed place. Just focus on that. I can control that. This I can hear. It's like trying to hear a polyphonic music. There are people who can actually hear horizontally. That is, they can hear the line of music on the top and then the next line of music and the next simultaneously. Right? Can you hear two lines of music simultaneously? You need a certain kind of release, a certain kind of opening to the whole to be able to hear two lines simultaneously without leaping from one to the other. That ability, it's a human ability, but it needs a kind of relaxation. And here is Noach, who must find in himself something of that letting go. If he is totally racked with anguish about the reality of the situation, then in a way there can be no salvation. And so what we have is that if the Torah says that God tells Noach, leave the ark, it must be, right? It's a strange assumption in the Midrash. It must be that this was in response to a prayer by Noach. This didn't come just from the outside. It had its roots, just like all things have their roots in God. So all things have their root in the human being. The human being is not schlepped out of the ark by God forcing him out, although there is an aspect of that, of reluctance. If he left the ark, if God said to him, leaving the ark, that was in response to some germ of prayer that he managed to achieve. Maybe not, all the words. Maybe he manages to sing something. But the meaning of his prayer is, please give me prayer. What kind of prayer do I want? I want the possibility of thanking your name. I want to find some basis of gratitude in your relationship to me, because who am I? I am not a tzaddik tamim. If I were a tzaddik tamim, I could rest in my merits, and I could pray to God with that kind of confidence. But I am disabled from prayer because I'm not that kind of tzaddik, and God wants the prayers of the righteous, we said. Right? So I know I'm not that. So I'm in a way, I've been told that God is blocking my prayer in a way. In a way, it's the fault of the world. That's it. This is the way the world is now. There can't be any prayer. But there is something in Noach that still believes in prayer. What would it look like? It would be the capacity to want to get out of the ark in order to praise God, to allow for a possibility of thanking God. In other words, there should be some sense in which it's precisely my chisaron. It's the word that the Beit Yaakov uses, the son of the Ishbitzer, of the Meir Shiloach. I didn't put it on your page. There should be some sense that Noach, when he prays, there's no way he can pray properly. That's why he doesn't pray. If he is shikor, says the Beit Yaakov, if he is drunk, if he is drunk with a sense of his own completeness, if he has any sense of euphoria, any sense of I'm going to be saved, right, whatever it might be, or that he is the perfect tzaddik, that would indeed seal up the sources of prayer. If one lives with such a sense of wholeness in oneself, then it really is impossible to pray. That's a kind of drunkenness, because you're looking at the world as if the world doesn't need anything. It's the opposite stance that allows for prayer, which is the stance of chisaron. I know that I am lacking. I know that I'm not worthy. All future righteous people, what is his argument here, his prayer here? He says, get me out of here, and then the result will be that all future tzaddikim, who come from me after all, will praise God because of me. One level of meaning there is, a more obvious level of meaning is, that everyone is included in me. All future descendants are included in me. So biologically, my survival from this place will allow for the future of a whole world who will be in a position to praise God. So I'm asking you for that possibility of praise in the world in the future at some point. But the Beit Yaakov goes on to say, he goes on to say, this is in passage Dalet on this parsha. He goes on to say, what he really is saying is, I am lacking. And it's because I am lacking, I'm not worthy. I'm not a tzaddik shalem. I'm not a completely righteous person. And it's precisely that opens up the possibility of prayer. Because then I cry from my chisaron. I cry from that sense that there is a direct connection, and it's out of that chisaron that all future righteous people. Can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. That all future people will come to exist. It's not just by my physical survival, but by my having found a possibility of prayer, which is based on a sense of there's something about me that's null. There's something about me that is, as the psalmist says, kinif amti, that I am not a fully human being at this point. I'm distracted. I don't fill my contour properly. And out of that, there is a prayer to God, and that involves the larger picture as well. And that would have to do then with gamalta alai, that you have done good to me, as we say in Birkat HaGomel. The good you do, asher gamal lachayavim kol tov. Yes, we thank God for doing kindness to those who are lacking, chayavim, to those who are not perfect, who are not perfectly righteous. And that is the goodness of God that can be accessed at a moment of reality, at a moment of limitedness, at a moment when it doesn't feel as if one's master of oneself. The Sfat Emet I just want to mention very briefly, and we'll finish shortly. The Sfat Emet in number 9, leave the ark, quotes the same midrash, please take me out of this prison in order to give thanks to your name, and goes on then to describe how there is a situation in which there are times for praising God, and there are times when praising God is impossible. The gates of heaven are closed during the 6 days of the week. That is, there are times in which one can't simply find it in oneself. The gates of heaven and the human heart respondingly are closed. Tefillah just doesn't work. Tefillah in the sense of praising God. But there are times when the gates are opened, and suddenly it becomes a question of times and seasons. That one lives one season looking for the other season, keeping one's eye open for the other. And that too is meant by lahafoch, right? Somewhere accept the limitations of one season, knowing that there will be a Shabbat, there will be a Yom Tov, in which Hallel becomes possible. And very beautifully and powerfully, he says, Kol lo hametim hallelujah. Those who have death in them, he reads it, cannot praise God. Those of us who live with a sense of death, how can there be praise of God? But there are times when something else is there. There's a larger world there. There's a different kind of connotation, a different kind of vision of things for a moment, which leads to a different sense of the whole. And at those moments, then everything is opened, and there is a sense she'en bi mita, that death has no dominion in me at this moment. At this moment, I'm not ruled by death. Right? So very much that strength. That's not the realm I live in this moment. Let me finish with another passage from Beit Yaakov, which is not on your page. God decides. The Mea Shiloh in the last source here gives us the moment in which God decides, Lo osif, I will never again curse all life, curse the ground, destroy everything. God repeats, Lo osif, Lo osif. Perik Yud, Pasuk Yud Aleph. Perik Chet, Pasuk Yud Aleph. 8:21. And this is God's response somewhere to the world now, to the praying world, to Noach. And God speaks to his heart. Right? It's Midat Hadin that speaks to his heart. Before he was saddened to his heart, and now he speaks to his heart. Vayomer Hashem el libo. I will never again. And the Beit Yaakov says this. This is an oath made by God that there will never be such a total churban again. This kind of totality will never happen again. I'll never give up, even approximately, on my concept of the world again. That will always remain in the world. It'll be the content that's there in the world. Does Noach know about this? Noach offers a sacrifice at that point, and the sacrifice God smells as having sweet savor, very strange anthropomorphic moment, and that's when God decides. God says, "I'll never do it again," which is an oath that God makes now. Lo osif, lo osif. And so the Beit Yaakov goes on to say this. We might think, normally speaking, as his father says. His father says, Noach, because if there's one thing he's learned as a result of this whole experience, is the necessity of tzimtzum in his life, to hold back on the overwhelming ego processes of his life, the ego impulses of human life. That's what destroyed the world. That there was that sense of limitless will, limitless desire, limitless lust of all kinds. Whatever I want, I must have. That sense of hitpashtut, of limitless control of the world. That's what brought a limitless flood on the world. And if there's one thing that Noach knows now, it's yirah. It's the need for limits, the need for fear, the need for din, the need for looking at things scrupulously and beginning to control there is that need. Because he had that now in himself, he could recognize somewhere that God was thinking the same thing. That's what the Mea Shiloh says, that something has changed in the nature of the world, that God is master of the world. And I know that because I feel that movement, that turnover in myself. I feel that making room for others, making room for all kinds of others as distinct from me. Right? So I know that God must be doing the same thing. The Beit Yaakov addresses his father's reading and says, no, it's the other way around. And we'll finish with this. He says, common sense might say it all begins with the human being. The human being, because he's now capable of learning something from the past and of controlling his ego and controlling his desires, now, in a sense, can offer something to God, and God changes his mind also. And he says, look, I mean, somewhere it starts with the human being. And in fact, the human being gets there, gives him an intuition about God, and God, in fact, changes. He changes from his own change. Rachamim from din. And the Beit Yaakov says, no. Truly, it works the other way. And here it depends on what one's sensibility is able to take on. Everything starts with a root. All human experience starts with a root, and that is God. There is something in God. This is something that God has decided. And what has he decided? Lo nachon lihitpashet. He's decided it's not right. It's not right to extend myself, my ego, again, I say it with some hesitation, but my will, my wish in this sense of din, my anger, to allow that to erupt without limit. And I have learned a certain kind of tzimtzum, that there's a certain, now there are vulgar ways of saying this, which I've often seen written in English accounts of the flood, which have no connection with these Kabbalistic sources. And then there are these Kabbalistic sources that the Beit Yaakov is drawing on here, which make it hard to put it into English words. But it has something to do with Ratzon Hashem, that God acquires a Ratzon now. He gives up on that will to destroy, and now he has a desire for Kiyum Ha'olam. He has a desire for the continuation of life, that the world should exist. And it's more than a kind of minimal desire. You know, all right, I'll let Noach survive. It's actually a kind of full desire. I'll never again. I swear now that there will never again be such a thing. So it's a very radical kind of remaking or transformation of God's previous state of being. You know, somewhere God has moved to a different place. Right? Moved from Kisei Hadin to Kisei Harachamim in a way that will never be changed. Right? That's God's oath. In this case, there is a sense now of living in a world that is in a different field of God, that something has happened here. Is it that Noach has really learned his lesson? Has anything really changed? We read dark things about Noach afterwards, you know, that there are strange, dark things that happen. Yeah, he gets drunk. That's the first thing he does. He gets off the ark, and he gets drunk. Somehow it goes to his head. What are we supposed to understand by this? I don't have time to talk about that. He gets drunk, and then there's a really unmentionable scene, a scene of repressed castration, some kind of strange sexual scene between Ham and Noach. Afterwards, has he learned anything? What do we have? What do we have here? Let's finish with Rosenzweig. Rosenzweig in number 11. He makes a claim for Judaism alone in all the world, as compared to other religions, other realms of culture, which try to increase themselves constantly, try to expand constantly, to be more and more in the world. Judaism, and it alone in all the world, maintains itself by subtraction, by contraction, by the formation of ever new remnants. In Judaism, man is always somehow a survivor, an inner something, whose exterior was seized by the current of the world and carried off, while he himself, what is left of him, remains standing on the shore. Something within him is waiting. It's a mysterious passage, but it comes to the end at the end of Rosenzweig's great work, The Star of Redemption. And it's one of the most mystical statements that he makes. What is She'erit Yisrael? What is Vayishaer Ach Noach? The remnant who is Noach, the remnant who is Israel and the prophets, that the prophets look to a future remnant. So Rosenzweig says it's the nature of Judaism itself through the ages, that what we have generation by generation is a remnant of the past, which is not just a poor part of the past. It's a somehow and a something, right? You can't find the words for it, but it's something that contains in it, right, in its fragmentary, interrupted, disoriented being, right? It's not a mood of absolute tranquility and I know exactly what I'm about. There is something in me standing on the shore waiting, that I'm waiting for something different. I'm waiting for a moment. I'm waiting for a future. I'm waiting for those future tzaddikim. And this is not a concrete, sensible, rational moment in which I know exactly what's going to happen in the future. On the contrary, I don't know anything. But I know that there is a larger picture somewhere. And that, for Rosenzweig, is what it means to be a Jew. At any moment in history, that sometime in the past there was a revelation, and sometime in the future there will be a salvation. And I stand here on the shore, and I don't know where I am exactly, but I'm a spark of something, I'm a nitzotz of something that has a connection with a continuum, with something else. And that, for Rosenzweig, is no small matter. What he's really saying is something that apparently is very small, very reduced and unclear, somehow, something, but actually is very, very encompassing. We have a few minutes, I hope.